Rule 62, Episode 2.
It's time for the SHAIR Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host, O.
Hey everybody, thanks and welcome to another episode of Rule 62. Today is feedback and gratitude, because I am very grateful for all the feedback I got from all my listeners. Guys, this was just amazing. It's so wonderful that you can have such an impact on the people around you that it would actually inspire them to participate. So listen, this episode is dedicated to all the listeners that sent in an email to give me suggestions about the show. And not all of it's great. Some people were startled by the Rule 62 episode 1 episode, and they voiced their opinions. So here we go. So I'm going to keep everybody anonymous because I did send out some emails to the people that responded, and I said, "Hey, I want to read your email on the air. Do you want to stay anonymous?" Most people didn't respond, or the other ones were like, "Yeah. Don't use my name." So that's fine. So I'll just refer to as either a male listener or female listener. So the first one goes to one of our male listeners, and it says, "Thank you for Rule 62 and reminding me that life is not so fucking serious. Keep Rule 62 coming." All right. So we have somebody in favor of the Rule 62. This came secondly from a female listener. All right. So first, I will say I love your podcast. I love the people you invite to share their experience, strength, and hope with the listeners. I enjoy listening to them every Tuesday, so I was surprised to see one there on Thursday. Well, this rant is very, very disturbing to me, and it was clearly the ravings of an angry man truly on the edge. Sanity, insanity, sobriety, being messed up. Are you okay? You should maybe go to extra meetings this week, not to take your inventory, but your Rant 62 podcast was scary and triggering for me in a bad way, and it shook me how much rage you had. So watch out, O. Please be well. Thank you. You know, I take for granted that the whole idea of freedom of speech affords me the opportunity to just do whatever I want. But I found out very quickly that it's not cool for me to just get up on the air and lose my shit. So thank you, female listener. I really appreciate your feedback. I promise I won't be raging on any more episodes. Okay. And then we have a male listener. Next one is, love your podcast just like it is. Sure, it will change as time passes, but we change and we grow. Thanks for the great work. All right. Then we had another female listener. The subject of the email was just what I needed to hear. Oh, good podcast today and nice timing. I just moved to a rural area in Michigan and I have nearly 11 months sobriety at this point. I need to vent as I really got a lot out of AA meetings in Detroit, but I had an issue with boundaries at meetings for men towards women. Back off. I have literally had men grab my left hand as I walked into a meeting I have never attended. At my most vulnerable times during this year, I have had men say the most inappropriate comments after the meeting. It happens to many women. It's not just me. Unfortunately, your listeners are likely not of this type, but hopefully they can be vigilant and protective of us women. I have attended all women's meetings that I find valuable, but I really treasure the male point of view as well. Focus is also off new sobriety in AA meetings and often is on self-congratulating sober folks with a ton of time and strength under their belt. They need to remember that early sobriety is scary and confusing. Lastly, I believe we need to incorporate relapse prevention conversations in our meetings and sober communication more often. I just want to stay sober, improve myself for this world, remove ego, and keep moving forward in sobriety and life overall. I know that I will never be fully recovered, as that is what I am told, but I will allow myself to recognize that I am better now. Thank you for you. Wow, I so enjoyed reading that email, and I did get a deep feeling of gratitude that even though I'm not excusing my ranting and raving on my podcast or are going to indulge it, but I recognize that for the newcomers, sometimes that's so deep-seated in where you're at in that first year. You know, there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of rage and there's a lot of resentment that we're still going through. And, you know, when you come into a meeting and you don't feel safe, you don't feel secure, one of the things that I was saying in the meeting is we have to be so delicate and careful with the newcomer. We don't want to push them out the door. And sometimes as old timers, we take that for granted. And we feel as though, well, you know what? They're newcomers. So that's how they're going to act. That's how they're going to feel. And I personally, as far as I'm concerned, don't feel that way. I feel that everyone has an opportunity to get clean, get sober, feel safe, and not have to worry about shenanigans and horse shit happening in a meeting. It's not cool to be hitting on women that are new in recovery. Now, granted, I mean, I've got 12 years. And, you know, for me to say that I have never participated in this kind of behavior would be self-serving, I guess, because, you know, I'm a human being. I'm a guy. You know, you see, you know, good-looking girl come into the rooms and you start chatting her up or whatever, and, you know, maybe you cross a line or two, all right? I have done that. I have crossed a line. I have been accused of 13-stepping. I have 13-stepped, you know, and I paid for it dearly, okay? The rooms came at me hard, and it was like, you don't do that in here. And I remember how, you know, with X amount of time clean and sober, I was so embarrassed by my whole behavior, and you know the group certainly didn't let me forget it. It was a lesson learned for me, and I swore I would never do that again in a room. So I'm not coming from a self-righteous point of view. I'm coming from somebody who's been there. I'm coming from somebody who's crossed the line, somebody who has had to make amends in the rooms while clean and sober, and someone who knows how delicate and volatile a newcomer is. So let's keep that in mind for everyone that's in the rooms, men and women. Okay, so again, thank you, female listener. And next, another male listener. Oh, did you talk to your sponsor about this? Man, that was quite a rant. You asked for feedback, so I'm going to share what I think my sponsor would tell me. Number one, what is your purpose for the podcast? If numbers, then you need Joel Osteen topics about how life is great and how everything is wonderful. If God put in your heart to share the message, then feature topics similar to meeting topics. I don't know who Joel Osteen is. I'm going to have to Google that, so I will get back to you. I don't think you can approach this podcast like you do a secular business. I don't think it is any of your business how many folks listen or subscribe. You have to get out of the results business and leave that up to God. Your job is to provide the content. That's it. This is beautiful. I 100% agree. I have spent time agonizing about the numbers and downloads and, you know, the social media and blah, 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 blah. And I find myself in the results business, which leads me to fear and self-centeredness. It's not about me. It's about carrying the message. So 100% I agree. Number two, the Recovered podcast has a good format of announcing topics and letting listeners call in or email with questions or comments prior to the podcast. I think for me, this is the best podcast I have found. Mark would be a good interview for you if you have not had him on already. I just started listening in August. Mark, I'd love to have you on the show. I'll probably reach out to Mark later. But yeah, I went, as a matter of fact, I did go and listen to a couple of episodes, the episodes of the Recovered podcast. One was on heroes. and the other one was on when the other shoe will drop. And it's like a panel of recovery guys or individuals, and they have callers call in and they ask questions and they reply. I agree. It's beautifully done. It gave me some great ideas, which I have been talking to my other podcast cohorts about. Anyway, I think it's fantastic, and I couldn't agree with you more. I love interacting with the listeners, which is, what the best part of the whole Rule 62 thing was it gave me an opportunity to connect with my listeners. So, let's see here. I very much like your interview format. It produces good content. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Number 3, taking inventory. What someone else does in a meeting is none of your business. Remember page 449, I would try and pray for them and leave it at that. If it aggravates you that much, I would talk with my sponsor about it. Fair enough, brother. Fair enough. And I do. And for most people, it's funny because the people that know me and heard the Rant 62 episode, they were in stitches. I mean, I got a bunch of, I love it when you cuss. Oh, I think it's so funny. Keep the Rule 62 coming. And then the listeners that don't know me on a personal level just thought I was a raving lunatic. And, that is going, as far as, again, I'm going to always come from my perspective on this. And I feel that if my personality or my message starts to actually tarnish the image of Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, then I certainly want to take heed. I feel so privileged and so honored and so grateful for both of those fellowships. They saved my life. They changed my life. Today, they sustain my life. So I certainly wouldn't want somebody to go, listen to that fucking douchebag sharing, talking about experience, strength, and hope in God, and he's ranting and raving like a lunatic. Okay, boy, he needs to go to a meeting. He actually needs to reevaluate his program. And what does that do? That actually puts kind of like a tarnish on the fellowship, and I certainly do not want to do that. So again, to those listeners that emailed me and said, "Oh, what is wrong with you?" Thank you. I appreciate it, and I am taking heed. Okay, so number 4, cussing in meetings. We have had this very issue in our home group. I belong to a Sunday morning closed group, which is at a clubhouse, but it has a spirit of a church service. In A Vision for You, the big book says, we become a respected and useful member of our community. I never heard the word fuck in my community. I did in my old community, not in my clean, well-fed, well-groomed, working, bill-paying, house-owning community. I don't think someone who does not cuss offends someone who cusses, but I do know someone who brazenly cusses for no reason can offend those who do not cuss. We had a lady that every time she shared, it was fuck this, fuck that. I was out checking the coffee and 2 people had stepped out because they could not stand to hear her share. That is when we made a change. That is totally the home group's decision on any of that stuff. That's how I understand it. Okay. I agree that it is the home group's decision that's called a group conscience, and they vote at the monthly or bi-monthly or whatever business meetings, and there's certain rules that they will ask members to adhere to. And some of these groups will say, no cussing in the room. This is a closed meeting. Don't bring your spouse. Don't bring a friend. This is a women's meeting, a men's meeting. This is a newcomers can't speak for the first 90 days. I've been in those kind of meetings. I've been in all kinds of meetings, and they're all structured differently, and there's a group conscience. If you don't like the meeting, go to a different meeting. Okay? I'm a firm believer of that. For me, at least where I live in my world and in my life today, I am definitely going to be in a cuss-friendly meeting. As far as the cussing goes, it wasn't really so much the issue of the cussing as it was, the feedback I've gotten is the ranting, the raving, the rage. That is what was the most disconcerting. Okay, so number 5, running off the newcomer. Whether you are talking about the podcast or at a meeting, I don't think we have the power to run off a newcomer. If someone is hurting enough to seek out AA, being able to cuss at a meeting is the last thing on their mind. Another example, we banned smoking a few years ago. The argument was that newcomers would be hurt. Did not happen. I firmly believe it takes what it takes. Fair enough. I think that not being able to cuss and not being able to smoke is not going to prohibit a newcomer from coming in. I still feel that if you're in an AA or NA meeting and you have a problem with the word fuck, then I think you need to fucking remind yourself where the fuck you came from, all right? And it wasn't from a bunch of clean-cut, well-groomed, well-mannered motherfuckers, okay? Again, just my point of view, not ranting or raving, just giving my feedback. But I do love this last part. He says, number 6, I still cuss and use fuck several times a day. Bravo. Whether right or wrong, I am working to clean up my language. By the way, my sponsor would tell me I'm not changing who I am is bullshit. I think that change is something we see in hindsight, like the promises. I still cuss when I pray. Do you? Or am I just that fucked up? That was awesome. That's Rule 62. That's like me not taking myself so damn seriously. And, I actually got on the phone with the male listener who sent me this email. We had a great conversation. We went back and forth on the phone, and I really, really enjoyed it. I was really, really grateful. The guy's got a lot of clean times, got solid recovery, so I respect all of his opinions. And at the end of the day, it's what's important is the message, and the message that the program, the fellowship should be of hope, of hope and living a life happy, joyous, and free. And so at the end of the day, listener, I totally appreciate the email. I loved it. I'm grateful to have you in my life today. So anyway. Moving forward, here's another male listener. This was one of my favorites. Heyo, I'm 5 months sober from alcohol and pornography. You asked for some comments, so here they come. I've been meaning to email you for a couple of weeks now, but I guess today was the day this was to finally happen. I'm on an early morning flight from KC to Chicago right now, which I usually sleep on, by the way. But I'm too inspired to sleep now. I just listened to Rule 62 cast. I discovered your podcast 4 weeks ago and have been listening to it alcoholically ever since, i.e. in an OCD way. I've listened to 3 or 4 shows a week, so here's my feedback. 1, I absolutely love your show. It is an important piece of my recovery program. It's the first podcast I've ever listened to. I think the format is fantastic. I wouldn't change anything with the format. Thank you. Number 2, you don't cuss too much. I've never considered the cussing on your show an issue until you brought it up on the Rule 62 segment. In my opinion, your level of cussing, I wouldn't worry about it at all. All right, fabulous. That's fucking fantastic. Thank you. Number 3, what I love about your show is it's structured and consistent. You're good at keeping your guests on topic and not getting too far off track. Your guests are fantastic. I love that you're getting authors and other people whose jobs revolve around recovery involved in your show. That adds credibility. I also like that your show doesn't just focus on alcohol or drugs, that you talk about all addiction, because addiction is the thing that attacks us when we are sober. And our solution to this attack comes in many forms, all of which we later learn are just symptoms of our addiction. I got to tell you, for somebody who's got 5 months sober, you've got some powerful rhetoric. All right. And I got a lot out of his email. It was one of my favorites. And when I remember discussing possibly niching down or maybe narrowing down the topic, and as we read on and continue, there's other emails where we need to broaden the scope. Addiction is not just about drugs and alcohol. Addiction is addiction. I'm addicted to video games, porn, sex, food, gambling, whatever. Addiction is addiction, and there's a craving to listen to stories that you can relate to. And if you're a sex addict, then you need to hear about sex addiction stories. So bravo. Number 4 on his list. I'm torn on the topic of having someone with less than a year on your show. I think it really depends on the individual. I would not make a habit of it, but I think mixing in some newbies with a strong message would be good for the show. This was another thing. I was, again, I have a preconceived idea of what my listeners want to listen to, especially the newcomers. And so I'm expecting, yeah, man, I'm a newcomer and we need to hear more from newcomers. And here's a newcomer that's torn. And he's not the only one. I had another newcomer that has been following the SHAIR podcast just as addictively. He hit me up on Facebook to tell me how much he loved it. And I said, hey, man, let me know when you have a year so I can have you on the show. And he pings me like every time he celebrates some clean time and says, okay, I've got you on my bucket list, man. I'm coming up on it. And I remember hitting him up recently and going, hey, listen, I'm thinking about having some newcomers on the show. And since, you're on the bucket list already, how about having you on early? And he's like, I don't know, man. I don't know. Let me think about it. I like the idea of, having at least a year on your show. I was blown away by the level of maturity and restraint that our beautiful newcomers have, and what's happening out in social media and out on the internet. Recovery is booming, and people are just speaking their truth out there. They're coming out and saying, I'm an addict, I need help, and I am willing to do whatever it takes or connect myself with whatever media there is to get clean and sober. For many of us, the only thing we had was going to meetings. When I first 12 years ago, Facebook was, non-existent. All right. At least for me, it was, I got clean in 2003, and I didn't even know what Facebook was when I got clean and sober. And thank God I didn't know what Facebook was when I was out using. I can't even imagine the ridiculous photos and videos that would be out there of me assing out till the end of time. So, yet one more thing for me to be grateful about. So anyway, again, thank you so much. And I will keep that in mind. Even though I have interviewed a couple of newcomers, I will continue to sporadically have both. So let's see here. And again, guys, I'm not going to say which episodes, but I've had some people say, hey, I didn't really like this episode, or I didn't really like that episode. So feel free to email me and go, hey, man, I really love this episode. Or go, this one sucked. Like, what the fuck was that person doing on your show? Okay, that's cool. I need to know this. All right. For the most part, it's all been positive. Okay. You asked about how to make the show better. Here's a suggestion. This is still the same email from the same male listener. A, is there a way to separate out the Rule 62 show from the other podcasts? On my phone, it showed up in the list with your other shows. My concern is that if someone brand new to your podcast accidentally listened to that one, they're going to have a very different opinion of your podcast. I'm not a fan of the ranting. Maybe some people like it. I don't know. I just keep in mind that every new show that you upload is going to have someone listening to it who has never listened to your podcast. And that one show is either going to turn them on or turn them off. And I don't doubt that one of the biggest challenges of a podcast is keeping it consistently good. So just 100%. Now, there's not going to be any ranting on the Rule 62. But what I do like about having it is that this gives me an opportunity to read back the emails, get feedback, which I really don't have time to do on the other podcast because it's already so long. So having feedback, and maybe just have one. We had a listener this week emailed us, and I'm reading it, blah, blah, blah. I could do something like that. But I'll tell you this much. I know that when I read my wife the email, the one that went, are you okay? You should maybe do extra meetings, not taking your inventory, but your Rant 62 podcast was scary and triggering for me in a bad way. My wife, I sent her the email, and my wife immediately replies, abort, and I just started laughing so hard. By the way, my wife, Marcella, I love you, sweetheart. You are the bomb. You're just the greatest. My wife is my number one biggest fan. She listens to every episode. She edits all the show notes. I could not do this without her. And I count on her to keep me grounded when I get crazy. And even though she knows me and she did hear the Rule 62 and laughed, she totally gets where it would turn off the listeners. She was like, that's it. As a matter of fact, she's like, I had already a Rule 62 number 2 ready to go. And a couple days ago, she goes, hey, did you remember to take down Rule 62, the second episode? I go, yes, honey, I did. So, Marcella, my love, thank you, babe. All right, so moving forward. B, I'm about halfway through the 30-something shows you have, and I plan to listen to them all. But maybe I am unique. How many new subscribers go back and listen to a year or more worth of podcasts? Is that common or uncommon? If this is common, what do you think about having a rating system? That is probably a slippery slope and may not even be possible, but it would help get people to listen to your podcast's best shows up front. I listen to AA speakers on recoveryaudio.org, and they have a rating system that I participate in, and it is useful. It would be a good idea to get the best interviews heard more often. Okay, so that, guys, I listen to AA speakers on recoveryaudio.org. I'm plugging them for free because that's what we do here. We're doing service. Folks, I think this is a fabulous idea. I have my favorite episodes, okay? But that's me. I'm biased. Some of my favorites are Sarah, which is a modern gypsy. And there's also Raquel G, which is the runaway model. One of the top-rated episodes was the first one, which is Sophie G's. She's uncut, unedited, absolutely raw, gritty recovery. It's beautiful. I just had a listener email me that they said they love what she said at the end of the podcast, which was stay in the middle of the boat, and it's so powerful. That's such a powerful message. And the one that's gotten the most amount of downloads has been George. George with Gut Level Honest. It's phenomenal. I've gotten great feedback from that, but it was one of the most impactful and powerful podcasts that I've done. So starting now, I would love for you to email me your 3 favorite episodes. Folks, please, if you would just please email me your 3 favorite episodes, and I mean as like in 1, 2, or 3, my number 1 favorite, my number 2 favorite, number 3 favorites, I can start compiling a top 10 list of favorite podcasts because I think that's a fabulous idea. And I could even plug that at the beginning of each episode and say, okay, folks, this week our top 10 most popular podcasts are blah, 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 or maybe even the top 5. Top 10 might take me too long. But anyway, I love the suggestion. Please, guys, let's get that in there. Okay, C. I have no experience with marketing or podcasts, but I think your show is poised to take off big time. Growth of this sort of thing has got to be logarithmic. And right now you are probably on the horizontal part of the curve. But as I keep mentioning your podcast in my recovery circles, and then they pass it on in their circles, 100 quickly turns to 1,000. The content and format is so good and very professional, I wouldn't change much. I'm not changing any of it. That is the resounding comment I have gotten from my listeners is don't change the Tuesday episode. So it will stay as is. Thank you guys. I really appreciate the feedback. And as far as going back and listening, yes, listeners come in and my downloads per day, like every Tuesday, I will download an episode. And that episode will get X amount of downloads. All right. But for the day, I get double the amount of episodes. So then I'll go back and I've noticed that there's more downloads on the other episodes, which tells me that somebody comes in, they listen to 1, and then they go back and they listen to 2 more. So yes, and every day that I go in, there's episodes that are daily getting new downloads, which is telling me that listeners are going back and listening. And this is not the first email that I've gotten that says, I've listened to this addictively and I'm listening to all the episodes. It's just like awesome. Thank you guys. Okay, next. E, Now I am going to get on my soapbox for a sec and talk about something that's important to me, sex addiction. In my opinion, it is by far the fastest growing addiction, at the same time the least discussed and the most shameful. It's where AA was 50 years ago. Its main component, pornography, is free. It's accessible to everyone. It's never ending. All you need to get is the internet, and you can use it in complete privacy. If you are someone who has an obsessive compulsive personality or just needs to escape reality for a bit, this thing can overwhelm you and become all-consuming in a hurry. The majority of society doesn't even believe it exists. So those whose lives are being ruined by it aren't even being made aware of the treatment options. There is so much shame associated with it that the SA and SAA community is very small and very watered down from the program in the big book. I spent 4 years struggling to recover from sex addiction and was not able to until I was willing to admit that I might also be an alcoholic. And I got into a strong AA group, started reading the book for the first time, started working the steps for the first time, and started to experience that vital spiritual awakening they all talk about. I guess my point here is that I think it would be beneficial to your listeners not to gloss over any sex addiction issues guests might also have. Not saying that you have, just saying there are probably more out there than we realize. It is a very common complementary addiction to alcohol and drugs. I suggest that you get a guy named Joseph Naus, I think it's Naus, N-A-U-S, on your show. He wrote a recent book called Straight Pepper Diet, which you may recall is from page 69 in the big book. He is an alcoholic sex addict. It is mind-blowing. His honesty and detailed descriptions are intense. He has done some radio and would be a great first guest to talk about sex addiction on your show. I'm going to have to find this Joseph Naus guy and get him on here. Okay. Oh, and I can't forget Pura Vida. Oh, it's fantastic. I got to tell you, I'm so impressed with the level of articulation and just the rhetoric and the knowledge and time that it took to write this entire email. I don't know how long it took me to read these last 2 emails, but there was a lot of time and effort that was put into both of these emails. And again, this one was one of my favorites, and I have received other emails from sex addicts who have said the same thing, that addiction is addiction. And they would love to hear more speakers talk about how they overcame their sex addiction. As a matter of fact, the next email came from another male listener. Heyo, just wanted to drop you a note and say that your podcast is a godsend. I listen like a true addict, meaning all the damn time. I'm in the process of starting at the first episode and working my way forward. Hearing the stories reminds me that I'm not the only crazy bastard out there. I think it would be great if you could broaden the addiction umbrella and have shares from addicts with other not-so-mainstream addictions. I personally identify as a sex addict. Even though drugs and alcohol were right there every step of the way, I think hearing stories from sex addicts, compulsive gamblers, people with eating disorders, people battling depression, etc. would benefit all addicts. All of our lives were unmanageable, and the steps are universal when it comes to developing a relationship with our higher power and progressing along the road to recovery. Thanks, and keep up the good work. So there, yet again, is another email from a sex addict. Okay, so guys, I spent some time talking with my buddy Shane from That Sober Guy podcast because we kind of went back and forth on this. Both of us do some cussing on our shows, and I wonder if this is if it pushes people away or how it affects them. And ultimately, what I came to the conclusion was, with the feedback, is the cussing is a mood point. The tone, that's the true issue. What is my tone, and where am I coming from? Am I coming from a place of patience, love, and tolerance? Or am I coming from a place of ego, self-centered fear? And I certainly don't want to come from a place of ego-based, self-centered fear. All right, that's not what I'm all about. I'm all about honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. I've worked this program vigilantly. I took 4 years to complete the Narcotics Anonymous Step Working Guide. I worked it meticulously with my sponsor. And again, it took me 4 years to do it. I developed such an amazing relationship with my sponsor. He's like a father to me. And I'll never forget going through those steps and the process and how it was life-changing for me. I am a gratefully recovering addict. And that's what I want to come across. I could not have done it without the fellowship. I cannot go more than a week without going to a meeting. I need the fellowship. So, guys, before this continues, because I already feel like all of a sudden I'm ranting again, I would really love and appreciate your feedback on everything that I just read to you guys. So guys, email me, o@theshairpodcast.com. The more I get, then what we'll do is I'll either consider popping one in before each one of the episodes on Tuesdays, or if there's a lot, then I'll just do a follow-up Rule 62 feedback episode. And so maybe what I'll do is just be Rule 62 feedback 1, and then it'll be Rule 62 feedback 2. Anyway, I love you guys. It's an honor and a privilege to be of service. HP, baby.
Thank you for joining us on the SHAIR Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.theshairpodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then. The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker and not of any 12-Step Fellowship as a whole. And though we discuss 12-Step recovery and the impact it had in our lives, we do not promote or endorse any 12-Step Anonymous program.